Welcome to the show, Rebels with the Heart, to my good friend Joe Mechlinski. It's good to have you on, my friend.
What's up, man? Good to see you too.
You too. This is a fun episode. This day is actually a fun day because I'm talking to a number of folks that I really have a deep appreciation and know pretty well. You being one of those. So we have to spend some time together, and I have a sense of who you are at the core. And so I love to get your work and your message out there. So welcome.
Well, you don't have to tell them that I'm your favorite, but I understand.
Yeah, it is unusual. I don't think I've ever said that on a podcast. So
Well, and we don't need to tell everybody who else you're interviewing today, so we can just leave it.
fair enough. So yeah. So I mean, obviously, you are truly a rebel with a heart. You've been talking about the concepts that we speak about, i.e., bringing heart into business, bringing humanity into business, really addressing the needs of the whole person. You know, using business as a platform for culture shift and doing it with intention and being willing to color outside the lines and create movements. That's something that you've been talking about for over a decade. And the first time we met, we just immediately clicked. That was my sense of things. But tell our audience about Joe, about why you do this work, what drew you here. You have an amazing career. You've written a couple of books now, TED Talks, multiple companies. You're doing some amazing investing in the space of conscious business. Share with you your why. What's the why for Joe?
Awesome, man. Well, again, first off, I love Rebels with a Heart. I love the brand. I love what it means, and it really is an honor to be part of that club and that you see that in us and me. So thank you. Um, I'll give the quick, like maybe 30 to 60 seconds macro timeline. I think in a lot of ways, we find ourselves at a bit of a precipice. I'm sure
Right.
in history of humans, we could always say this, but I really think that the last couple of years, there's this great quote where it says, there are decades where nothing happens,
Mhm.
and there are weeks where decades happen. And I feel
Yes.
like in a lot of ways, that's what we've all been living through.
Yes.
For me, I grew up in Baltimore. I, grew up sort of on the other side of the tracks, a lot of trauma, a lot of tragedy, a lot of hardship. And, I went to 23 funerals by the time I was 23. I know what it was like to look at an empty fridge. I went to a high school that had a 20% graduation rate. All of these things are not bad. They just were hard. And I think, in a lot of ways, as I was climbing out of that, sort of destruction and despair, so to speak, I started to see when I got to Hopkins, like, okay, what's the other side of the fence look like?
Yeah.
People who have needs, who have access, who have wealth, who have what I thought were going to be really happy people.
Yeah.
And when I got there, man, everybody knows that the way this play goes, which is that's not what I saw. What I saw were people just as empty, just as, not totally fired up, fulfilled, people living someone else's dreams and directions. And I think in a lot of ways, for me, being a rebel a
Yeah.
bit, right? It wasn't very employable. So when I left, Hopkins, I had a little bit of background in business. I started a couple small businesses, and I just started this consulting firm
Yeah.
with the idea in mind of how do you bring a little more humanity? Because I read a bunch of books on psychology. I mean, far be it for me to use my degree, but as I was reading and learning about emotional intelligence back in the late 90s, I was like, all right, so let me get this straight. You don't put people through a pressure cooker
Yeah.
to get an unlock of discretionary effort or high performance, then why does everybody do it that way?
Right.
And what you'll start to sort of quickly see, like you and I both are parents, in a lot of ways, parenting is an interesting, like little self-discovery, which is, on one hand, if you're being honest, you're just making it up as you go along. There is no playbook. There is no, real like guideline here.
Yeah.
And the second is that we're all doing a little bit better than it was done to us.
Yeah.
Now, if you apply that to the corporate place where we spend 8 to 10 hours of our lives every single day, like if you really want to like unlock human potential, like it would almost be, I've used this analogy a million times, which is like if we had sent everyone to the gym every day,
Yep.
instead of working out, they'd eat Doritos and drink Mountain Dew. Like what would that look like after a decade or two? It wouldn't look so great. And that's what the workplace was, I think, really pre-pandemic.
It's what our culture looks like now, unfortunately, in many
Yes.
respects.
And
Yeah.
so part of what we've been after is to partner with organizations, specifically leaders and CEOs, to really help them rethink the way to, not just do it because it feels good, but do it because it is good. Do it because it saves time, finds time, and gets you from point A to point B even faster. So we put all this stuff into the work that we do. I've written a couple of books, you said, and, we've done it now with big companies,
Yeah.
which is also crazy because, you get to an organization that's got 10,000, 20,000 employees, for a CEO of a company that size, in order for them to cope, to put their head on the pillow at the end of the night, for just to even like fathom the sense of responsibility for that many people, they almost have to disassociate.
Yeah.
And I know it's the work that you do too, which is like, how do you reattach people to the heart, the essence, the soul? Because again, every book that's been written about customer service, employee experience, it all comes back down to the relationship. And so if that's true, then why don't we start treating each other first as like just humans, and second, like as adults? And that really is kind of a nice little jumping off point in some of the work that we do and we care about. So
It's a
look, we're just
perfect
gonna have
jumping
to-
off. It's perfect. Yeah. Well, really well articulated. I'm going to come back to the present in some of those moments, but I want to go back for a second because just the beginning of your story, right? You spoke about where you've come from. There's an immense amount of resilience to come from that background, go to Hopkins, right? And then to go off and start businesses and to bring this in. Where did that resiliency come from? Where did you foster that? What were the influences in your life that kept you moving in the right direction, quote unquote, in the right direction to be able to lead, and tap into your own
Right.
potential, right? That you've now been able to start to multiply out into other people's lives.
Yeah. I'm asked this question a few times and I try to think of like the real answer because, for me, I give the credit to my parents. My
Yeah.
mom was an amazing woman. She whispered in my ear when I was young that it was special, that I could do anything I wanted to do. And I think that for a young kid growing up in the kind of environment I did, it opened up a channel of like what felt like specialness and love. I was like,
Mm.
oh shit, if she
She
thinks I'm
was.
special,
She
then,
was. Yeah.
right, then if she thinks I'm special, then I got to get out there and like sort of make it happen. Which we can argue down the road of like, is feeling love producing value? It's a whole nother subject for another podcast. But that was one piece. My dad was and still is the epitome of what it means to be a high honor, humble, heart-led, hardworking son of a gun. I mean, he's been at the same company for 46 years. He started out sweeping floors. Now he's an executive, a partner in a 4,000 person company, non-college degree, by the way.
Yeah.
And I have stepmom who's amazing, and I have teachers and mentors and guides. And so like, even in the, what was like a scene from The Wire, if you watch that HBO special, that is literally from my neighborhood.
Yeah.
There were just angels, there were people who just, not a hand out, but a hand up, as I say often, which is just like they saw something, and a lot of mentors, a lot of guides. And then I think ultimately, like my first book was called Grow Regardless.
No.
My family, our kids are 10 and 12, and I started singing this song to them when they were really small, like Mechlinski's, they find a way. So like Find a Way actually is the name of one of my holding companies, because I think it's all humans.
Yeah.
We have a tendency to meet the moment.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, maybe there are some things I can do that are interesting, but I think we all have this inside of us. I think we have an unlimited potential with finite time. I'm just got to figure out how to channel it. So, that's how I would think about it. And, I got here through a lot of really good mentors and family and people who set good examples. And then, in the back of it, I think the other piece I would just share quickly is when you watch 23 people die by the time you're 23 and the last is your mom, you sort of get this lesson, I think in some ways hard to ignore, that this is short time that we're going to have here if you are even lucky.
Right.
So what are we doing? Right. Like if I'll give you one last little bit that I always think about, which is like, if you were given 6 months to live, what would you do today?
Yeah. Think about this question.
What if you were given 6 days to live? What would you do today?
Yeah.
That to me, death gets us current. And so we should be getting current with like what really matters. And I think it's, again, part and parcel of like why we jam and why we have so much common ground, because I think, whether it's tragedy, whether it's suffering, a lot of these things help you figure out how do you serve and how do you support and how do you play a small part in progress. And so I don't know, that's sort of the way I think about it for today.
Yeah, that we are very similar in that fashion, and I think it's somewhat unusual the amount that we think about our mortality. I mean, I think that you and I, that's something we talk at length about. That's something that we think about on a regular basis, and
Right.
and not from a sense of fear, but from a sense of just acknowledgement, right? Like that's there, and it helps to inform your action or what you where you put your attention.
For
So,
sure.
um, coming back as we bridge toward the present, because I want to share what you're doing in the world today.
Yeah.
You mentioned the role of many mentors and guides. Um, what what was it that kind of how did you connect with them? Why did they take an interest in you? What did you do to help create that relationship and foster that connection? Because there's something special around that. Obviously, you know that there's an interest because of what we do, but like, how did you go about developing those relationships, and how did that, and how are you cultivating that now in the way that you're kind of the reciprocity of that in others' lives, right?
I like you see the thing I'm putting down might have something to do with both of us, but more specifically you, my man, on the guide side, because it does take a village. I
Yeah,
think, Esther Perel has this really good bit. She's a relationship expert about like
yeah,
the problem with Western marriage, about like you got to find the one that is
yeah.
the one for everything that you do. And I think if we
Hard.
roll back
Yeah,
without getting judgy about what it's like in an urban environment and family values and the familial structure, I just think community is a big part of it, and I think what did they see in me? I think in a lot of ways, it's everyone who's been broken,
mm,
open, and anybody who's had real hardship has a memory, and it's whether it's trauma, still open wound, not sure how to heal it and become whole, or whether it is whole, there is gratitude for it. I think might change the person's approach depending on where they're coming from or doing it, why they're doing it for a particular reason. But I think overall, it's like when you see somebody stranded on the side of a highway, if you are the only one driving past, the studies say you'll pull over and like lend a hand. If you feel that there's 1,000 cars on the highway, you won't, that bystander effect comes in. So I think, the harder things get, I think sometimes, humans have a tendency to really surprise each other. And I think in a lot of ways, it's it's just in our wiring, right? Like DNA, we are social, collaborative, like this whole collective experience is we didn't get here by ourselves.
yeah,
So I think there's a lot of that. And I also think like whatever we can do moving forward, teeing you back up to collectively reset our thinking about what does it mean to really be a good friend?
yeah,
What does it mean to be a good guide, right? A good Sherpa, someone who, can hold space, not fix the problem for you,
yeah,
but can share.
yeah,
Last thing, real quick. 100 years ago, there were no physical standards. We didn't know working out was good. Do you remember like the guys with the handlebar mustache and like the pictures that we see back?
yeah,
Because back in like the 19, hundreds when the Olympics got going, people started to think about this
yeah,
physical standards. Well, thanks to people like you and other companies that are now like entering the mental health conversation in a different way, emotional health, mental health, spiritual health. All of a sudden, I think these things are, things that everyone's thinking about, and we're
yeah.
looking for toolkits, solutions. And I think it's a conversation that's been overdue, and pandemic kind of helps speed some of these things up.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, back to physical standards, that's an interesting one because you and I both vibe out on all the biohacking and longevity stuff as well, and different things that we do in that space. But I mean, back in that time, before the Industrial Revolution, people were all outside in the sun, eating, food that they were growing and hunting. I mean, it was a very different reality of what it meant to be a human being, right? Our physical fitness. And that's why even like I said, like people are in fact, and this is just a tangent, people are in fact sitting around drinking Mountain
Right.
Dew, Doritos, and absorbing themselves into surface level consumption. And as opposed to participating in the community, like actually participating in the community, creating purpose, creating experiences together. And that's something that that's partly, I think, the role that we're playing here is how do we move through this period? Because it's a really fascinating time to your point in human development because everything is accessible instantaneously, right? And for everyone in the world, right? And yet people are feeling more lost, confused, alone, isolated, undervalued than ever. And yet we're living in this almost dystopian experience where we have more wealth and more access and more possibilities than ever before. And yet people are living in this state of almost like, I don't know how to describe it, but I mean, that's the work that we're both doing ultimately, right? Because I don't want to call it hopelessness, because it's not, there's an essence of like just that grayness, right? And
Fair.
despair.
Yeah.
And that's what it is. And people are yearning for a reunion with each other, for lack of a better term. And yet the answer is in many ways is so simple. And yet people are just unwilling to see that, which is it's back to real relationships and simplifying what really matters. And that's the work that we're ultimately doing. So back to the present day, tell us about Shift. Tell us about the work that you're doing with leaders. Tell us, because we have a different way that we're doing this, right? I appreciate that you spotlighting the way that the guides model works. But
Yep.
you're doing the guides model, but with executives. You're doing the guides model with teams in a different design. Tell us about the work that you're doing right now and how, and yeah, I'll just pause at that.
So I got to go back because there's a thought that you said that I think it's like important just to quickly pull on. I know we're going to run out of time. We'll get to my stuff here in a second, which is like 200 years ago, kings and queens that ran kingdoms did not have access to the information we have.
Exactly.
So what you're saying really resonates with me because it'll hit the piece that we do today. I finally got a TED Talk last year. It did really, really well. The whole point of the TED Talk was for me to talk about the future of work.
Yeah.
And throughout the talk, I wouldn't give any answers because I think that stimulus response, that loop that we keep running with each other, which is like, I'm looking for the answer. I'm looking for the answer. I want to be entertained. I mean, think about Rihanna's performance at the Super Bowl. I'm not a Rihanna fan. Like I think she's great, but like, I'm not like a fan of her. Like I don't follow her music. The amount of backlash from people that look like you and me, that like, you didn't entertain me enough.
Yeah.
Like, okay, so, but she's a billionaire and she's done kind of well. And so she was pregnant. And like, if you've never had to make a decision between work and being a mom,
Yeah.
I don't think your opinion matters.
I agree.
But the conditioning is where I would come and segue back into the thing that we've done, which is like, look, we all grew up being told what to do. We were sort of put in these sort of manufactured, made, ready educational systems, which aren't educational systems, they're memorization systems.
They're
We as
conditioning systems. They're conditioning systems. Yeah.
They're conditioning systems that were literally built for the factory floor.
Right.
We know that. In fact, the bells that tell you what shift to go back and forth,
Exactly.
the same school bells that we use,
Right.
because of Pavlov. That
Yes.
was literally in the same time.
Yes.
Skinner with behavioral conditioning, but all these things that we were beginning to learn. Now, fast forward to entertainment, right? Conditioning us. Where does culture, how do I fit in? You've got advertising tell us that we're not good enough. Then you've got companies telling you the way it needs to be.
Yeah.
We need a new human story. We need a new story of value. And what we help organizations do, and specifically CEOs, like I've never met a CEO who didn't have a big vision in terms of how they thought it could be better.
Yeah.
Sometimes though, they don't think about like, it's a hard job, right? Double binds everywhere, rock hard place. How do I hit results? How do I not be a jerk? How do I lean into hybrid work?
Yeah.
But we're slower when we're on Zoom. We just are. I mean, someone who loves the idea that I get a chance to work from home.
You too. The same.
It's not like meeting in person.
Right.
So these are the decisions that we've sort of apexed at the top of these hierarchies for these folks to make decisions. And I think going back to like your point, people scanning, skimming, and scrolling mindlessly and not getting the dopamine hit for the reward or the reward is really not being given in an effort-based way, meaning like you're getting kind of cheap candy.
You
right?
are.
You're getting these like, if I take some candy, I get this dopamine pop, but I didn't get it because I did anything. I did it because I'm sort of shortcutting the system. We've been shortcutting the system for a long time. And I think in a lot of ways, back to the idea of like companies that we admire, they tend to have a few things that are important. Number one, they've got a story, a vision that people can think about that really hits them here authentically.
Yes.
And it can't be corporate propaganda. I remember when Kentucky Fried Chicken did a big impact campaign for breast cancer. It was like, I'm sorry, like trans fat, your chicken probably causes carcinogens. And like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
It's got to line up, right? And so the first piece is like, really, where does the CEO, where does the organization, even if it's a bigger one, where are we going? What's most important? Is that being clarified?
Yes.
Or have we checked the box? And then ultimately that vision, that story is a promise to its employees, its stakeholders, its vendors. It's this kind of gets into that conscious capitalism of like, it's more than just the customer. It's more than just the shareholder. It's also the employee.
Yeah.
And so that's really what
employee's family. This is the best part. It's also the employee's family. It's also the competitor and the competitor's family, right? This is literally, and that's really what you get with multiplication.
We're sitting on a rock,
yeah,
hurling through the universe. And we have nuclear missiles pointing at each other. We're in the middle of nothing. And we can't like wake up to that. So again, as we go in and help organizations, it's been 20 years. We've helped more than 600 plus companies. We are an extension of the CEO's, eyes, ears, hands, and feet. We help sort of operate as a sort of change management arm. So like if you said, hey, I'm taking LifeGuides and we've got to think about this mission impossible high stake moment of like how we're going to find a way through this terrain, we would go in and find a way to unlock more potential, more capacity from your team. And then we'd spend about, 3, 6, 12 months helping activate that. And that was the play we ran up until about 2 years ago, where, this, that we, had kind of a something drop in my lap. And it was this platform that initially was used as a micro learning management. Without a question, a quick video and a quick prompt for people to take a response. And then when I saw this and then the pandemic hit and then hybrid work and everybody's trying to get everyone on the same page without scheduling more meetings, that's really the challenge right now. And, I think a lot of CEOs and executives and leaders feel ignored. They don't feel like they're being heard. And, this sounds like weird because you're like, wait a minute, that's typically at the bottom for the rank and file. And I go, it is. And, look, we've had this experiment for, how long now? Almost 3 years about working from home. Newsflash, it's not working. And in my second book, I was all about like, unlock the people. This is by the people, from the people. I'm from the other side of the tracks. Like, let's help these people out. And we're not collaborating very well digitally, virtually. Like we're messing up this opportunity. And this thing that we've built, Latch, I believe is fundamentally a way to think about this differently. And I'll give one last little bit about it, which is this. Internal emails that CEOs are sending out right now are open at a rate somewhere between 50 and 70%, which is what I've read about the data. That's weird. So like when you say something, only 50 to 70% of the time are people even opening up the emails.
Right.
And watch this. Up to 50 to 70% that are even opening up, your A's or B's, half are spending less than 9 seconds reading it. Mm-hmm. So like we all know that, most of communication is nonverbal. We know it's voice quality. And, we're like resigning down to texting and typing, hoping that it, back to your point, that it's going to like reach me.
Right.
It's not reaching anyone. And so this is why we're moving slower. This is why organizations are going, you got to come back to the office.
Communication friction as well, right? Mixed messages that people are not, anyway, keep going. Yep.
That's it. The goal isn't clarity. The goal is understanding.
Right.
And most-ish CEOs have never taken a psychology class that will help them through this. There are blind spots that they know they have. Yeah. And quite frankly, we got to pick up the pace. And so what we've learned is there's a way to asynchronously communicate or collaborate where we send out this note every Monday. The teams answer a question. They watch this note from the CEO. They make a commitment. And then all of a sudden by like 5 p.m. on Monday, it's no longer the Monday blues or the Sunday scaries. We're calling them happy Mondays because now your team knows what you're thinking, what you think the definition of good looks like. By the way, it took them 5 to 8 minutes to do that. And now they're starting to talk to their friends. It's like this like virtual water cooler from all over the country, depending on where your company is. And so it's not, another system to go log on to. It sits in your email. You pop it out. You're not in the slacking, the teaming, the Asanas, the project management. No, this is like if you had a digital podium. Again, you're a CEO person. Like, there's like 3 things that you want your team to know next week. Well, what are?
Right.
That's it.
I think it's beautiful. We've obviously been talking about your product for a little bit, and I think this pivot is really well timed, right? So if you want to call it that, it's the opportunity to still reach the people is still really there, and it will continue to be, right? So the original vision was how to get teams talking with each other, teammates talking to each other, and that's still a need. But there, to your point, people are yearning again. Back to our point, people are yearning for leadership. They're yearning for direction. They're yearning for guidance, right? They want that. I believe that. That's my personal opinion. And leaders have struggled to figure out how to adapt to do that in the current design of a lot more technology, a lot more tools, a lot more noise, a lot more voices, frankly, because people do have voices now. And so now it's about how do you distill and integrate that in a way that still allows that integrity of the business, of the vision to be realized. And I do think that's a real challenge right now. So I commend you on that, Joe. It's great. It's really good. So, and I think fundamentally it goes back to leadership, and we've talked about this too. Leadership at all levels, self-leadership is a key part in how people and organizations grow and thrive. So this is part of setting that example. And so how do we change how we consume information? How do we change how we communicate information? How do we, you know, slice and dice that in a different way? So I think that's going to continue to, ripple out through the organization.
Well,
So
2 million years of evolution, collaborating with proximity in person,
right.
right? Tribes, towns, cities, countries, corporations.
Yeah.
And, for 18 years before the pandemic, I didn't have a problem walking into an organization ever and saying, hey, I'm curious, is everybody on the same page? Do you feel like you're being heard? Do you feel like everybody's rowing in the same, sort of direction? Do you feel like you're moving as fast as you could? Do you feel like people feel understood and seen and heard? Do you feel like you've unlocked discretionary effort? Do you feel like everybody's all in? Like, no, 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 and no, and no.
Right.
Now we take 2 million years of evolution of us trying supposedly to figure it out. You do 2.5 years of virtual video games. Like that's what we're doing right now. And, as much as you and I are connected, as much as you and I have common ground, as much as if we were at a coffee shop right now, again, nothing's going to replace that. And, a lot of people, I think we're learning, like I just learned about body doubling. Have you ever heard of this? So like apparently if you and I do, I have, ADHD, right? Like, sort of just check the box as a entrepreneur. I think they say 70% of us have, and I question whether I actually have it sometimes or not, or just a convenient answer that I learned 4 or 5 years ago about my inability to focus. But they say that like if you work in a quiet office with ADHD, you're missing out. Like if I had Derek next to me, right? You for like the next 3 hours, we would be feeding off each other's
Oh, I
focus.
do that. Yeah.
So again, we'd move further and faster. And so like there's this quote that I love referring back to, which is like, we shape buildings and then they shape us.
Yeah.
And you can see like the literal, everybody's redoing their office. But
Yeah.
the figurative is, what's the rhythm of the week?
Yes.
So yeah, go.
So it's funny. This is something I've been pondering quite a bit recently for this exact reason, right? Is because and we've talked a little bit about this. I track my calendar for rhythms. I look at flow states, right? We look at and this, you do too. We've talked about this. Like, how do we tap into the rhythm and flow of teams? How do we create group flow? And this is a whole other podcast we could do. But how do we get that to happen so that people are producing, quote unquote, at their optimum, and that vibration of co-creation and accelerated is happening, but within a systematized approach, but also allows for that reset, rest, reflection, autonomy that people also want. Because I do think, I mean, as CEOs, that like we want, like I love the fact that I can spend every night with my wife and kids. Like it's amazing, as opposed to, and now, I've been traveling more, but like for the previous 10 years, I was on the road 100,000 miles a year. Right. And now we're home every night. So, I mean, like, that's something that I really relished. And it's like, how do you find that balance? Because I agree, so much gets done in that shared connection. The trust is accelerated, the ideas flow, it just clarity happens. And so if we could just find a way to replicate that, but still give that space. And we talked about, like, I just think that's the part, that's the $1 trillion question around productivity and team performance right now. Is how do we solve for that? So we're doing that in different ways, right? So you're looking at it from the communication perspective of business. We're looking at it from the communication of heart and soul and healing, and where we do that in the workplace kind of comes together in a fascinating, really powerful way. So anyway, I always love the chats, man. We could chat for 3 hours on this. So I mean, yeah.
Well, we often use a phrase that might be helpful for people listening to this, is that how do you give people freedom within a framework?
Yes.
And so I think about this a lot, which is like, again, how do you give people a vote and a voice, but also a vision about what's important? And I think the best question to ask any, leader of themselves, the organization, of the team is, what does good look like?
Yeah.
Because I think we're all operating from, fragmented reality from a bunch of different reasons why. And just the idea of what good looks like right now, I think, is a good place to sort of try to, again, get people to understand, not just to clarify, which means it's a conversation, right? Because if I send you a note later today, I'm like, hey, this is how I'm feeling about something, like that's that's fine information, but that is not understanding. That's just information. There's no context. There's no connection down to like the things that really matter to us. And again, like you and I are like way down a rabbit hole in this about like conversations and communication. And, again, like if you are the leader of an organization and your job is to, again, sort of move from point A to point B, you're a resource allocator, you're a capital allocator. In a lot of ways, you've got to find, I think what you just said, which is, not just the freedom and a framework, but really what's that rhythm? How do you unlock more without doing more?
Yeah.
And I think that's the nuance. I was thinking about this the other day. Do you feel like the job description of a CEO has like adjusted or evolved since the pandemic? And I've got a reason I'm asking this. I'm thinking about something this week, and back to like the question of what does good look like as a CEO. I feel like, well, I'll let you answer, but what do you think?
I would say yes and no. I mean, it's a good question. And someone else asked me that question. And that wasn't exactly a CEO, but it was around the role of just executives.
Mhm.
And the answer is yes. Practically, it has changed, but in some ways, aspirationally, no. Because I think where you and I were prior to the pandemic is where we've come around to. So in some ways, my definition has not dramatically shifted, but the actual reality of what's happening in the workplace is right. It goes back to that statistic I've shared related to with you from, I think it was Deloitte or PwC. We talked about CEOs recognizing the role of their own personal transformation, playing a key part in the leadership of the and transformation of the organization. If you ask CEOs that 2 years ago or 3 years ago before the pandemic, it was like 10%.
Right.
Now it's like 80%, right?
Mm.
So there's an acknowledgement that, I'll answer the question. So simply put, my belief as the CEO is they set the vision, they make sure that the business is capitally, established, able to run and be sustained, and to be making smart investments. They're responsible for cultivating the team and the culture, and making sure that the right people are in the right roles and responsibilities, and empowered and able to be, held to a standard of success, and then ultimately be able to. This is the last part, to adapt and learn and evolve, especially in the midst of challenge or crisis or unexpected current, and to be a steady presence through that experience. Like that, when I think about the five responsibilities core of a CEO, that's what I think about, right? And that was before the pandemic, and that is today. What I think has changed is is in particular related to the overarching perspective of how does a CEO embody that beyond just a business lens, but actually become that to the organization, right? And I think that's something where there's a shift taking place. Before it was more what I'll call task oriented, right? And now it is becoming more realized, actualized in the form of like there's a purposefulness, for lack of a better term, in that in order for you to be able to do those things well, it requires a certain level of maturity and pursuit of mastery. Can I say that? Because that's back to humility, right? Like that, there's like always an edge, and it's impossible, to your point, to satisfy and particularly to delight all stakeholders at all times. And so the ability to move through that and to be able to be, because you use the word, not disassociated, but actually present, and yet able to move fluidly through that, is a really fascinating journey. So great question. I was not expecting that. And that was kind of a fun question. So anyway,
Well, look, I mean, we're gonna sit here and jam it up. I can't have you over there.
well,
Just,
what did you think? What do you think? I mean, like that was my answer. What do you think?
well, I think, look, I was taking some notes because I think this is actually the role of a CEO, which is, I think the setting of a vision or the setting of a conversation is one piece, but I think it's then being able to allow it to evolve and be
Mhm.
collaborative and be co-created. And that, I think that sort of curation of conversation, I think, is incredibly important. But I also think back to what you just said, which is like, if we look at the CEO as the apex of the conversation about like, well, do we do this or do we do that? Like these big, major decisions. I think one of the things you said is really important is I think the role of a CEO is, the inside has to match the outside. So the inside transformation has to match the outside. Like, where are we transforming to? Right. So I think there's a great quote from a guy named Alex Sheffron that I love. He said, "You don't have the business you want. You haven't become the person that it takes to run that." And so that idea, it's like not a selective accountability, right? You got the Zoom CEO who like recently was like, "All right, I'm going to pay myself not 300 but 10,000 bucks for the year," and everyone's like, "Well, he's still a billionaire." I get that, but when's the last time you saw a CEO go, "Me too"? Like, we got to lay people off. Not selective accountability. So it's like all in. If
Yes.
you're asking your team to be all in. So I think it sort of teeters on those things, but I also think the other piece is, the CEO has to be really good at learning what digital collaboration looks like. And I never thought I would say that.
Well, it's still part of the essence, right? It's just it's a
Right.
new skill, it's a new capability.
Right. So, we might have said emotional intelligence back in the day. I think digital across time and space, async, all of these things that I think are important. And I would throw in another one, which is like being able to be a button pusher, not like button pusher with people to be like annoying and try to trigger people, but more of like button pusher. There got to be someone who's willing to roll up their sleeves and go do something. So if like you're a CEO of a client right now, 2,000 people,
Yeah.
runs this company, and I know for a fact they have no idea what Chat GPT is. Now I've been talking about AI since 2015 with him.
And that's unbelievable. He doesn't know that. This case.
And I'm like, when are you gonna like well, we have a team. No. You
Yeah.
you have to be in.
So basically, what I'm hearing here in this conversation is we have like 4 more podcasts that we could do on different themes. So maybe we should do that. Um, so anyway, this has been a blast. Joe, where can our audience connect with you, learn more about your work personally, work with you? Tell them how they find you.
So listen, we're in rebuild mode after 20 plus years. I think right now we've got a great team at Shift. We're looking at ourselves as like a tech-enabled consultancy. Primarily, if you need people to get on the same page without scheduling more meetings, check us out at shiftthework.com. But I would say like the second reason that people call a lot, which is they love this type of conversation that, you and I were able to open up today. So if you have like an upcoming meeting, and you're not looking for like a pre-canned off the shelf, I wrote 17 books, I'm going to tell you the same story over and over again, but you want a real conversation. I've been a speaker for 20 years. I've had a chance to really, been honored to speak with people. And so you can go to joemechlinski.com, go check that out. And, I'm kind of like dusting off the shoes after the pandemic and getting back out there a little bit more than I used to, because I feel like it's that kind of moment, it's that kind of moment to speak with people deeply and, in a way that I think none of us are better than any of us. And we're all trying to figure this out. We're all doing the best we can. And sometimes it's just not good enough. And we got to be willing to sort of speak that type of truth, I think, which is sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not. And sometimes you're doing the best you can. And sometimes it's not going to help us get to where we need to go. So what's that adult to adult conversation need to be? So very good one.
Thank you, brother. It's been an honor and always a joy to talk with you. Thanks for blessing the audience today and wishing you continued success in everything that you do. Thanks for joining us in Rebels of the Heart.